Hi guys, thanks for coming to my speech tonight. I'd like to start it with a quick show of hands. If you like the rain, raise your hand. Okay, the rain's quite popular. If you like the sunny cloudless day, raise your other hand. We got quite a number too. All right, if you like standing in the rain or sweltering sun for 20 minutes after a long day at school while waiting for the bus to arrive, and when the bus finally arrives, you have to get on it either soaked in cold water or sticky sweat, raise both your hands and wave it around. Okay, so we got a few jesters in the audience. That's good to know. As we all know, being exposed to the weather isn't exactly a fun experience. Unfortunately, this is something that many students of the Mount Barker Waldorf School have to deal with on a daily basis. While waiting for the bus to arrive, they have to wait out in the weather. In summer, they have little shelter from the sun. In winter, they have no protection against the rain. Past students remember this terrible experience, and future students will likely have to go through it too. I want to bring an end to this cycle of pain and suffering. Everyone knows that a shelter is something that protects you from danger or discomfort. A shelter, that's a structure that serves as a shield between you and things that might hurt you. I like to think of shelter as something more than just a physical barrier. I like to think of it as a place of comfort, a place of safety. You feel sheltered when you're huddled up by the fire on a cold winter night. Also, I forgot to do my PowerPoint thing. You feel safe when you tuck the blanket under your feet as you lie in bed so that the monsters couldn't grab them. This sense of calm and comfort when you walk into this very building, whether you're aware of it or not. This sense of comfort is what I want to capture with my bus shelter design. I mean, I can hardly call this comfortable. No, there we go. Now, here's a weird thing I noticed. This sense of comfort seems to be present in most Waldorf buildings. In its curved edges and blurry colors, the buildings don't only feel comfortable, they feel alive. And this has always fascinated me, and even more so in the recent years. There's just something about Waldorf buildings that drew me in, and I want my bus shelter to have the same effect on its users. I don't just want to design a bus shelter, I want to design an anthroposophical bus shelter. That wasn't even a joke. Now, some of you are probably like, whoa, what does anthroposophical mean? Anthroposophy is a philosophy created by Rudolf Steiner, and is the fundamental ideology for all Waldorf-related things, from your education to your arts, and yes, the architecture. Anthroposophy means the wisdom of the human being. It is the understanding of our consciousness and spiritual connection to the universe. Steiner wants us to develop through our senses and experience of the world, which is why he created anthroposophical architecture. At the beginning of my project, I vaguely knew about anthroposophy, but not a lot. Like, why do we paint the walls the way we do? Why does the room have so little 90-degree angles? And how exactly does the color pink develop spiritually? I barely knew anything about anthroposophy, much less how to design an anthroposophical bus shelter. Thankfully, not knowing something means that you now have the opportunity to learn about it, and thus I started researching. I started in the deep end by reading a thesis about Steiner's architectural work. It talks about the features of the two most famous anthroposophical buildings in the world, the first and second Goetheanum, both designed by Rudolf Steiner himself. Now, while the thesis was very interesting, I barely got anything out of it, simply because the ideas that they talk about were too complex and advanced for my understanding. It also doesn't help that it was 300 pages long. It wasn't long before I started looking at an alternative source of information. Now, I'm just going to give you guys a quick personal history. Before I came to this school, I attended another Waldorf school in Malaysia, the Kalip Waldorf School. My former main lesson teacher, David Lim, thoroughly studied Steiner's work and was responsible for the interior design of the school. Now, even though I left the school 5 years ago, I still kept in contact with him, which is great because this meant that I am in direct contact with someone who is familiar and passionate about the ideas of anthroposophy and its applications in architecture. Let me just see. On February, I got onto a video call with David and I asked him all sorts of questions about anthroposophy. Now, I was particularly interested in the reasons why walled-off buildings look the way they are. Like, what are the reasons behind the color choices, or the shapes, or the material usage? And teacher David, being the awesome teacher he always is, happily answered my questions with his understanding on the subject. Now, this is a picture of my brain. I'll be referring back to this slide a lot because this is how I'll show you how my understanding of anthroposophy evolved over time. In this meeting with David, I learned a lot of the basic ideas that serve as the foundations for the more complex ideas that I'll encounter later on. Over here is my understanding of color usage. I found out that the color choices of each classroom are very deliberately chosen to help that age group develop their consciousness at that point in time. Think about in kindergarten. In kindergarten, you want the kids to just exist and experience. You want them to live in an almost dreamlike state. This is why I use the color pink a lot in their classrooms. It's just such a soft and kind color. It allows them to just be calm and relaxed within the space. On the other hand, in high school, we want the students to think on a higher level, which is why we use the color blue a lot, the color that encourages thinking. I also asked about shapes. Why do we have certain shapes in the classroom? I found out that the reason why we use so little 90-degree angles in a room is because it allows more energy flow around it. The same applies to the doors, the windows, all the other decorative features. Something about these curves just brought these inanimate objects alive. Though I must admit that I didn't really understand what David was talking about till 7 months later where I went, that makes sense. I also asked about natural material usage, like why do we use so much natural materials in our buildings? David explained that natural materials have a sense of sturdiness and livelihood to it. He said, think about a wooden table. A wooden table feels sturdier in comparison to a flimsy plastic chair. The same way that a wooden toy feels more alive in your hands than, a Lego figure. Now, at this point in time, you could see that the ideas are just kind of floating around the brain. They haven't really connected to anything just yet. This changes later in the year as I learn more and more, and things start falling into places like puzzle pieces. Anthroposophical architecture wasn't the only thing that I learned in this meeting. David told me all about the guy that he learned all of this from, Johannes Schuster. Johannes has been part of the world of education for more than 30 years, helped design many of the buildings in the Little Yara Steiner School, and runs lectures on anthroposophical architecture internationally. Then David offers to put me in contact with him, which was absolutely terrifying, as you know, Johannes is possibly one of the biggest experts on this topic, and I still barely know anything. However, this is too good an opportunity to miss out on, so I accepted. Now, the knowledge gap between Johannes and I are huge, and I don't want to waste this opportunity of talking to an international lecturer by just staring at him blankly as he talked about things that I couldn't understand. Thankfully, David also sent me an online lecture by Johannes, so I could get an idea of the things that he'll be talking about in our meeting. Now, in this hour-long video, I got two main takeaways from it. The first is that walled-off architecture is not a style. Despite the fact that all walled-off buildings seem to follow a certain style, it is not the defining trait of what makes something walled-off. It is all about the underlying theory. This shouldn't have come as a surprise, but it allows me to tell the difference between the style and the idea behind it, which leads me to my second takeaway, the building's hierarchy of needs. Johannes said that, like people, buildings has needs that has to be fulfilled. They are not just a structure that holds a roof above your head, they're alive and have to connect to the world around them. These needs can be broken down into 4 categories, each just as important as the other for a happy building. The first category is functionality. the ability to function. A building should function because, if a shelter doesn't really shelter you, it's not really a shelter anymore, isn't it? The second category is ecology, the ecological consideration of a building. A building should be sustainable and environmentally friendly because, we live in the environment. And personally, I like to live in a healthy environment. The third category is connection to nature. Nature is a great source of calm and beauty, which is why we need to integrate it into our architecture more. The fourth and final category is the spirit, the idea that gives life to a building. When a room is alive, you can feel its energy in it. Just take a good look around the LAC for a second, right? This room doesn't feel like a dead and empty room. It has a sense of life, a sense of awe. This life is what anthroposophical architects seek to capture. This is what I want to capture with my bus shelter. But the question is, how do we do that? How do we bring a building to life? And that was exactly what I asked Johannes when I got onto a video call with him. I click the next one? Yes, I clicked the next one. All right. Now, on the 24th of March, I went onto a video call with Johannes to talk to him about anthroposophical architecture. One thing really stuck out with me and influenced the way that I designed my bus shelter later in the year, and that is Johannes' explanation on how to bring a building to life. He said that to bring a building to life, you must first find the spirit. But what is the spirit? I got a little metaphor to help us visualize this. Think about a phone. Without its software on it, it is just a hunk of plastic with some metal bits in it. It's dead. But once you install the software onto it, it comes alive. The same applies to a building. A building without a spirit is just a gray concrete block. It's dead. Now, there is one major difference between an iPhone and a building. With an iPhone, you first construct the phone, then you upload the software onto it. With a building, you actually first find the spirit, then you shape a physical structure out of it. Okay, but how do we find the spirit? Johannes said that to find the spirit, you must first ask, what is the purpose of the building? Is it a communal space for people to connect and express the arts? Or is it a space for learning and intellectual development? The purpose of a building closely reflects its spirit, so by identifying what the purpose is, you will find the spirit with it. All right, just now I briefly mentioned shaping the spirit into a structure, which sounds like a really weird and abstract idea, which is why we use a little tool to help us imagine this. Let's just say you walk up to someone and you see them do this. Immediately you go, oh, I'm not welcomed here. But if you walk up to them and they did this instead, you would immediately go, yes, I'm welcomed here. The same actually applies to a building. If the spirit of the building wants to close you off from it, the building itself would be blank and flat and unwelcoming. But if the building is wanting to welcome you in, the actual building would be more open and embracing. So yeah. Now at this point in time, I looked at my brain slide and thought, yeah, I know enough to design a bus shelter. Spoilers alert, I don't. But we'll get to that later. Now, when you design something, you must know what the requirements and limitations are. And in my case, I got a few of them that I got to take into consideration. Whatever I design have to fit in with its environment. At the moment, the bus stop is on a grassy hill with a couple of trees around it, so whatever I design have to fit onto that slope. It also has to be movable, as the school plans to move the bus shelter to a different location in the future to free up traffic a bit. This means that whatever I design have to be movable and flexible with the terrain. It also has to fit all sorts of legal requirements, and there are literally books upon books of them. Furthermore, if I actually want to get this built, we're going to need to get the council's approval. I started my research by emailing the council, asking them about the process of getting a council approval, in which they replied by saying that if the shelter fits certain requirements, I won't even need to get a council approval, which is great because this means that I don't have to do paperwork. So there are 3 requirements it has to fit. The first is that the floor space cannot be more than 15 meters square. 2, the distance between 2 supporting poles cannot be more than 3 meters apart. 3, no part of the building can be any more than 2.5 meters above the ground level. I honestly could have spent a lot more time looking into the regulations and limitations around it, but there is just so much to look into that I had to make a choice between spending all year looking into the rules and requirements or actually designing the bus shelter. As you can tell, I continued by designing the bus shelter because I'd rather stand here today and tell you about how I designed a bus shelter, not bore you to death with all the rules and regulations around it. So yeah, I started designing the bus shelter. I started designing by collecting all the requirements, both physical and legal, onto a piece of paper and sat there to brainstorm different ideas that would fit all the requirements. After conversations with my dad, Isabel Harwood, my mentor, and Daryl, the groundsman of the school, I managed to come up with the very first draft of the bus shelter. Is audio working? Yep, it's working. All right. This design fits all the practical requirements. It uses stilts so that it creates a flat surface for the students to stand on. The stilts can also be cut short to create a flat. The stilts can be cut short so that you can pick up the bus shelter and move it to a flatter spot so that it's still flat against the ground. The slope, oops, I actually clicked the button, my bad. The slope of the roof also follows the slope of the hill because this is to make sure that no part of the building is more than 2.5 meters above the ground level. The building is also separated into 2 separate structures because 15 meters square is too small an area to fit 30 students comfortably. So if it's proposed as 2 separate structures, it should technically fit the requirements. Now, it was fun messing around with all the limitations and creating a design that would fit all of them. There is one major issue with this design, though, and that is that it has no elements of anthroposophy in it. After my months and months of research, there is nothing walled off about this design. But that is actually an intentional move. Now that I got all the practical aspects out of the way, I can actually creatively expand on this design to create an anthroposophical building that still fits all the physical requirements. Now I don't have time to go through every single draft that I've ever created, but I want to share with you one that was a huge milestone in my project, and that is draft 4. As you can see, it has come a long way since the first draft. It still had retained some of its original features like the stilts and the 2 separate buildings, but now it also has walls to protect the students from the wind and seats for people to actually sit on. Now, there was one feature that I really focused on, and that is the shape of the building. As you can see, it starts off flat, but then it starts curving around at the end. The idea is to mimic open arms, because open arms can be interpreted 2 ways. It could be seen as someone going in for a hug, or someone letting go of one. The idea behind this is that the shelter is there to welcome the students when they arrive at the school, but also let them go as they leave. It's the midway point between going for a hug and then letting go of one, the same way that the shelter is just a midway point between school and home. Now, I've talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people really like the design. I've talked to Daryl, I've talked to the teachers, I've even did a whole presentation to the class 12 and 11s on this, and I got a lot of positive feedback. However, there was one particular person that I was looking for the approval of, and that is Lucy Crawford Sanderson, the architect of the LAC. Throughout this presentation, you've listened to me talk about the LAC over and over again, and it is honestly because it is one of the most beautiful work of architecture I've ever seen in my life. It has been a huge inspiration in my own design, so when I was given the opportunity to talk to Lucy, I was in awe. It's kind of meeting a celebrity. Anyway, Lucy and I have previously met on an online video call before, so I felt comfortable showing her what I've designed to see what her opinions are. Long story short, she was not impressed at all. Now, I honestly should have seen this coming. There was a lot of things that I didn't take into consideration, like the angle of the sun or the direction of the wind. You know, the basic things that all architects take into account. This really stumped me. Like, oh wait, no, and we're not even talking about the anthroposophical aspect yet, because like, yes, it has a few anthroposophical elements in it, but it is far from being actually fully anthroposophical. It has too many straight edges and just doesn't have that sense of life in it. And this realization really stumped me and sapped a lot of motivation from me. I thought I was doing fine, but turned out that I had so much more to do, and there was so little time left. This led to the descent to the lowest point in my project. My project has been doomed to fail at the very start. There is no way that I could understand anthroposophy, architecture, engineering, all the legal requirements, and apply all of it within a year. It's just too unrealistic. This realization hit me like a train, and I couldn't get back up. I felt like I've done absolutely nothing all year. I haven't designed a bus shelter, I still don't understand anthroposophy, I can't achieve my goal. Every time I muster enough strength to get back up, I just get knocked back down again. I try to do some research, but I don't know where to start. I try to modify my design, but I don't even know what's wrong with it in the first place, so I can't really fix it. So time was quickly slipping out of my hand, and I don't know what to do. This was the lowest point of my project. This lasted for a few months, and one day I just decided, you know what? I am going to go meet up with Lucy, figure out what's wrong with my design, so that I could actually make an improvement to it. I mean, I'm not going to get anywhere by just moping around, am I right? Yeah. So yeah, I organized a meeting with Lucy and talked about how she would design the bus shelter if it was her job to design it. Now, this meeting was a huge pivotal point in my project for two reasons. The first is that, The first is that during the discussion, something slowly dawned upon me. I realized that I will never design anything as amazing as the LAC. There's only so much I can do with my skill level, time, and limitations. The best I can do is simply the best I can do. If I put in my best effort to create this design, then the result I get is going to be the best possible outcome. And there's no point beating myself up for not designing the second LAC. I mean, it's not really going to help me design any better. So, yeah, this realization allows me to lower my expectations for myself and actually cut myself some slack so that I can actually find the strength to continue with this project. The second major I have a little thing there. The second and major impact of this meeting is that during the discussion, the term biophilic design came up. Biophilic architecture is the idea of bringing a building to life by making it a part of nature. I mean, nature is alive, right? So if nature is alive, whatever's part of it would be alive too. Now, when I say a part of nature, I don't just mean incorporating natural materials into the bus shelter. I'm talking about making the bus shelter blend in with its environment, to be active, to change, to sway. We're not incorporating nature into the design, we're incorporating the design into nature. Understanding biophilic design made everything that I learned before click together. Like, it all finally made sense. Why we want our buildings to blend with nature, with the environment. Why we use so little 90-degree angles, and why we have such an emphasis on using natural materials in our building. It's like a web just formed across all my previous knowledge, and it to form a single image. These two effects allowed me to find the strength to push through the last leg of my project and design the final design of the bus shelter. As you can see, it hasn't really changed a lot since draft 4, since I was kind of running out of time. There was a few things that I added with this design. I added a bit more shape to the roof to mimic shoulders to emphasize the imagery of arms. I've also added a bit more space, a bit more roof out the back so that we can actually fit more people underneath. Now, the most interesting feature that I added with this is the way that light filters through the different type of roofs. Over the main shelter, the roof is solid, creating a complete shadow. Out the back, the shade is made of translucent sheets, so it will create some sort of foggy shadow. In between the two main shelters, there is a roof made out of sticks, which allows light to filter through as lines. The idea behind this is so that the shadow would create patterns on the ground that would shift as the day goes by. Now, even with all these interesting features, it is still far from perfect. On a practicality aspect, it is not very stable. It also doesn't really block the wind that well and has terrible wheelchair access. On an anthroposophical aspect, it still has far too many straight edges and not enough quality of life to it. Because, again, I didn't have enough time to make actual proper changes to it. If I had the chance to completely redo this design, I absolutely would. But that doesn't mean that I'm not happy with what I've designed. Sure, this design is not perfect, but it's something that I've designed. It is part of my journey. The best I can do is I put in my best effort to create this, and that by itself makes it one of the best things I've ever created. Now, in the last month of the project, I expanded on this design by creating a paper but 3D model so that people can have a more visual and tangible reference to it. I've also drew out architectural plans by hand with the exact measurements so that the school can have the dimensions of the shelter in case they ever decide to build it. I got two main takeaways from my project: the understanding of anthroposophy and the understanding of myself. As you can see, I've learned a lot about anthroposophy in this year. Before this project began, this slide was basically empty. Even though I've learned a lot about anthroposophy, I barely scratched the surface of the iceberg. Imagine what I'll find if I start digging deeper. My understanding of myself has also really evolved throughout this project. I found out that I learn better through direct human interactions rather than reading a 300-page long thesis. I've also learned that I set myself really unrealistic goals, and that the best I can do is simply the best I can do. I cannot force myself to achieve something more than what I can already do, but I can direct my attention to more attainable goals so that I can get the most out of all the effort that I put in. Even though I wasn't able to design a perfect bus shelter, I hope that this is one of the first few steps in the journey to getting a bus shelter built for our school and the students. If we can show people what they can possibly have, we can all take steps together to reach a common goal. One final note: if any of you Year 11s are interested in building the bus shelter next year, contact me. Thank you. Are there any questions?
I just say, well done.
Not quite a question, but thank you. Sorry? What were the walls going to be made of? Well, honestly, I didn't have a lot of time to think about materials. It was on my list of things to do, but I never got around doing it. I thought about it being wood, but haven't really specified what kind of wood just yet.
Hoeyin, I was going to ask you whether you are planning a career in architecture, but I actually want to ask you whether you're planning a career in public speaking. And if not, why not?
Honestly, I didn't really want to go into... Architecture is not really my field of expertise in a way. I have other interests, and I was just kind of just playing around with it in this project to see how I feel about it. Not working? Okay. You were asking about public speaking. Public speaking terrifies me. Though I am considering teaching, so that would include a lot of talking, so I guess... my parents say that I'd never shut up, so... Yes?
My question is, along the public speaking line, you used a whole bunch of really engaging techniques in that talk. Where did you get those ideas from? Just helping some of the other young people who don't know this.
Well, yeah.
Rephrase the question just so we've got it on film, please.
Oh, okay, all good. The question is what kind of techniques I used in public speaking and how I learned them. I think it's basically just skills that I picked up throughout the years. Like I think I did my first presentation back in year 8, and and then I realized comedy. So yeah, pretty much I just used a lot of comedy. I figured out the magic of PowerPoint and just played around it for like years and years, which is why I can create all sort of weird and funky animations. Yeah, I guess all this sometimes people say that my hand gestures is engaging, but this is just something I do in my normal conversations. But yeah, Elena said I had to tune them down, but I think I've forgotten to do that. Yes?
A fantastic presentation, well done. I was actually, an idea that came to my mind when you were at that point where you were inspired again, was it with the leaf on the...
Oh yes, biophilic designs.
So when you actually mentioned that, I thought about how they build and use the environment against a hill. They'll use the back of the side of a hill to build their house against. And I wondered if you'd ever considered cutting away even though you mentioned that there's plans to move it, whether you could actually dig away at the land to drop it and have shelter, have your design with the support of the ground, cutting into the ground.
I guess it's something. So I assume you're talking about why I didn't decide to just shape the ground itself and build a shelter on it instead of using stilts. I personally believe that I think it's a bit more affordable to do this than to actually shape the land itself. And I've considered different ways of shaping the land, and I can't think of a way that would look nice. Like, if we're going to build it up by filling it up with dirt, we're going to have to put up a lot of retaining walls, and it just makes the front of the school look like a brick wall in a way. But we can't drop it because the road is up there, and I kind of don't want the student to walk up a bunch of stairs to reach the bus.
Yeah.
I think they would appreciate that.
Yeah, well done.
Yes? Yeah, you'll need a mic so that the recording could hear you.
Do you think you'll continue studying Steiner's Anthroposophy?
Possibly. I'm not going to actively look into it as much as I did this year, but if I come across a piece of it, I won't let it fly past. And if I do become a teacher one day, maybe, I would definitely look into anthroposophy a bit more because I really like the world of education and the way they teach it. So yeah. Yes? You want the microphone?
Do you think you'll actually have the shelter built?
Unfortunately, I highly doubt it since, as I said before, there was a lot of flaws with it. I showed this to a draft person once and he looked at it and went, well, that's an interesting creative choice. So it might not be the safest design to build, but I would love for it to be an inspiration for a future design that actually gets built. Yes, Tori? We need a microphone.
First, I guess that was great. That was just great. I'm just kind of wondering, in terms of your future life and what you end up doing, I know, for example, I guess a lot of young people are thinking about maybe one day we'd want to, own a home or live somewhere by ourselves. Do you think you'll take the elements that you've been learning about anthroposophy and this aspect of architecture design into potentially would you want to build your own home someday, or would you think about those characteristics when you want to get a house one day, assuming we can all afford it?
Yeah, well, getting a house for myself is a really far-fetched concept at the moment, so I haven't really gave it much thought, but if I do get to design it, I would definitely have a bit more elements of anthroposophy in it. Yeah.
Yeah, did you have any estimates on how much you need to build it and have it designed in accordance with the architecture? 20,000, 10,000?
Cost-wise, again, that was something else that was also on my list of things to check out, but ran out of time.
Cool.
I literally finished like my architectural plans literally like a day or two before it's all due, so. Any other questions? Oh, sorry. My presentation was a bit longer than the others, so I'm just going to try to keep my thank yous a bit briefer. I'd like to thank Isabel and Jessica, my mentor and supervisor, for keeping me motivated throughout the year. I'm sorry that I didn't contact you guys as often as I probably should. I'm just not very good at asking for help. Should work on that. I'd like to thank Rose and Eleanor for actually putting all of this together. Would not have happened without you guys. I'd like to thank my friends and classmates for, reminding me to take breaks sometimes. I'd like to thank Lucy and Johannes for basically teaching me everything I know about anthroposophy. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank David. Without him, I would not be who I am today. Before I met him, I was struggling academically and socially, but through his patient guidance, I managed to grow into the person I am today. So, David, if you're seeing this, thank you for everything. Thank you guys for coming.